when I preach or when we go through a sermon series, I quite like it to be, how do we apply this to our lives? How do we get stuck into this? How do we do this today? But today's verse is pretty big, isn't it? Because it's either healing an incurable disease or raising the dead. So that's it's a pretty big thing that we read today. But we also believe that Jesus still can do that. There's people in this room who've been healed, and there's stories of people who've been raised from the dead even since Jesus ascended to heaven. So we still believe that. But there's so much more to this story as well, that as I've been looking through this, it's way more than just even those two incredible things. And so what I'd like us to do is just think, oh Lord, what do you want to say to me this morning? What one of these things? I'm not dead, or I don't have an incurable disease, so what do you want me to speak? What do you want to speak to me today on this? And I was pushing Billy. I took Billy and Theo down to our park yesterday. Any parents here who are tired of pushing their kids on the swings? Yeah? I've been doing it for 10 years now. I would pay someone to do it. I've got to that point, okay? And yesterday they wanted me to push Billy and Theo on this big swing together, and so I was doing it. And our boys are like, unless you're pushing your hardest or the highest, you're not putting enough effort in for me. So they wanted to go as high as they could, as hard as they could. And then so I was pushing them quite high, and they were holding it. And then Theo, as he was going up and down, he just said, "Dad, I'm scared." But then the next one, the next time was like, "But I love it." She's like, "I'm scared," but he's like, "But I love it." And I kind of feel that was my kind of challenge from reading these verses today. It's almost like, for me, it's like, what am I scared of? Like with Jesus, with walking with Jesus, like what am I scared of? Because if we look at the last few stories from the Gospels, like they've been crazy stories, haven't they? They've been really big stories, and you keep on hearing the words like they were afraid, or they were terrified, or they were scared. And so these disciples are like that, but it's almost like they're saying, "I'm afraid, I'm scared," but they're almost like saying, "But I love it." Like, I love it. I want to keep, I'm not like, don't stop doing it. Like, I am scared, like, I am fearful, I'm terrified, but keep going. Like, keep going. And I just felt challenged myself as like, how do I kind of step out of my comfort zone, or take more risks to where I'm in like almost scary or unpredictable places walking with the Lord. So I'm like, oh, this is scary, but also I love it. And this is another story today with the disciples. And so what I want us to do this morning, I just fall in love with this story. We've had the spoken word from Sue. I'm going to explain a little bit more, and then I'm going to show a video at the end and leave whatever the Lord wants to do with you. So let's just, if you feel comfortable, hold your hands out and close your eyes and just say, yeah, Lord, I'm open. I'm here and I'm open. You know everything that's going on in my life. And I just ask you to speak to me. Show me something of what you want me to do, or say, or encourage me, or stop. I'm here and I'm open. So speak to me. Speak to the person next to me and everyone else, but I want you to speak to me this morning, Lord. Amen. Amen. So these are the verses, and it says, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him whilst he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, look at that part, synagogue leaders named Jairus, they obviously knew this guy, he became a follower, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pled earnestly with him, "My daughter is dying. Please come out and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. And this was a synagogue leader. This guy was one of, like, we often see the religious leaders or the Pharisees or the synagogue leaders, almost like they're the bad guys. They're the guys who keep on criticizing Jesus. They want him out. They kind of want to take him over. But this synagogue leader believed in Jesus. Like, he came to have faith in him. This guy would have been very well respected. He would have had a powerful position. This guy would have been someone who would influence influence other Jewish leaders or Pharisees. And he had started believing in Jesus. Where others criticized or went away, he started believing or believing aspects of Jesus. And then he had great faith. He tried everything else. He prayed. He got everyone else to pray, all his friends. But he had great faith. So him coming to Jesus showed great humility. He was on his knees as he had this power, position, and respect. But he knew he was helpless. And he called out to Jesus for his daughter. And so it says, and so Jesus heard him, and he went with him. And as he went with him, a large crowd followed and pressed around him, talking about Jesus and his disciples and Jairus and everyone else. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. So we think, oh, that's a little bit of a random thing. Why do they say that? Well, a woman was there who shouldn't have been there. This woman was there and she wasn't allowed to be there. We read recently about a leper, someone who had leprosy, a disease that could be caught from other people. They had to shout, unclean, unclean, whenever they were around someone. And this woman was a little bit similar to that. She was seen as unclean. She wasn't allowed to be around other people. And we read, there's a book in the Old Testament called Leviticus. And Leviticus chapter 15, if you have a look at it later, Leviticus 15, it talks first about men who are unclean from blood and having discharge, men who are not well. And when there's blood and discharge, they have to be seen as unclean for 7 days. And then basically it's talking about a woman on her period. And about a woman on her period would have been seen as unclean. And so she had to rest until her period of that time of the month was over. And you might think that's a bit harsh or unfair, but there's 3 good reasons for this, especially for this woman who was seen as unclean. Basically, if you're bleeding, it's not a good thing, is it? So if you're bleeding, you either need to get better or rest. And so God has put that in place for this person, this woman, or these women, to get better, to have rest. Also, if you're bleeding and people are unsure about it, God doesn't want you to spread that disease. I came here a few weeks ago. I had slap cheek rash. So I came literally at 11 o'clock, which was still before some of you, but I'm not going to mention names. I came at 11 o'clock, I preached, and then I left straight away. Was that because I was feeling unsocial that day? No, it's because I had a rash and I didn't want to give it to any of you. And so same with this. If someone was bleeding and they were unsure, they didn't have the NHS back then. This was a few thousand years ago, so they didn't want it to spread. And finally, a big part of it as well was recognizing that God is holy. Like, God is holy. So he wanted to teach people that only those who are completely clean can come to him, can come into his presence. And so the standard was high, which is why, like, for us today, that's why all our hope is in Jesus, because Jesus, we believe, was perfect, that he was unblemished. And so none of us are good enough to take this bread and wine. It's all because of Jesus. So we're confessing, I'm not good enough, but Jesus is. And so there's 3 reasons why people would have been unclean. But because people are people, they twisted that. And they twisted this law over a period of time. So when it got to Jesus' day, there's a theologian called Morgan, and he says, but people had twisted God's law. And so according to the Jewish ideas of that time, this woman would have been divorced just because she'd had this problem for a long going time from her husband. She wasn't allowed to live in her own home because of this had gone on for such a long time. She would have been ostracized from all society. She would have been excommunicated from the services of the synagogue, and thus shut out from the women's courts in the temple. And this is for 12 years. Like, this woman had this for 12 years. Maybe she was married and had a family and all these things. This is for 12 years. And she was being banished, like ostracized. People would have known. People would have known about this. And the people would have known because verse 26, it said she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all the money she had. Yet instead of getting better, she got worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And we've got two people in the story. You've got Jairus and this woman right now, and they're the two opposites. The man comes speaking to him and saying, come with me. He addresses Jesus as, come with me. The woman doesn't speak to Jesus, and all she wants to do was try and touch his robe. Like the two opposites. This guy coming to Jesus, please come with me. And this woman, without anyone knowing, without speaking to Jesus, just wants to touch the toggle on his garment. But she also had faith, and Jesus was her last hope. All her money was gone. All the professionals had been seen. And so because the professionals had been seen, she would have gone to the religious leaders. The word would have spread. And so everyone would have known that this is the woman who is unclean. She can't be around anyone. She definitely can't be near a rabbi like Jesus. This woman can be nowhere near him. And even it says, like you see there in verse 28, what does it say? It says, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes. It doesn't even say, if I just touch him. If I just touch his clothes. Why was she thinking of just touching his clothes, not him? Fair play to the lady. She was even following the law herself. Because if she had touched the skin of Jesus, he would have been unclean. He would have become unclean. And so she was thinking, I'll just touch his clothes. I'll just touch a piece of him, and that's all I need. There's power in that. There's nothing about the clothes. It's not like special, but because they're on him, if I touch his clothes, then I will be healed. So even in that, she was thinking of Jesus, not for him to be unclean like she was. But when she touched him, it says this in verse 29, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Like that's hard to express, and like that feeling. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body she was freed from her suffering. Like the closest I can even come to that, which is really far away, is I once had a tooth which had an abscess, and my face got swollen, and I went to see the dentist, and they're saying I was after 10 days because you're on holiday, and they said, we'll give you an injection, but you have to come back tomorrow. And I said, I couldn't really speak much, but I was like, take it out now. I'm not coming back tomorrow, take it out now. I need you to take it out now. And they took it out, and I thought if they take it out, my pain's going to go straight away. But it didn't. It didn't go straight away. But there was the next day then it went. But for this lady, she'd been bleeding for 12 years, and immediately she touched his robe, and it was gone. All the pain, all the bleeding, everything completely gone. And then verse 30 says, at once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. That's an amazing verse, isn't it, to look into that another time. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. And he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Why is Jesus doing this? Why is he making a scene? There'd been other times in the gospel where it says that all the sick touched his clothes and they were healed. But he didn't make a scene about it. He didn't stop. He didn't say who did this. He just kept walking. So why is Jesus creating a scene? Why is he stopping? He's off to heal someone's daughter who's dying. So why is he stopping? Why has he got everyone to listen and to hear what is about to happen? Why was this? And verse 33, Imagine Jesus just pausing and just waiting. And this woman who wanted to do it in secret felt the healing, and maybe she's just there on the floor, and then all of a sudden he's just waiting. Who's gonna confess? And in verse 33 it says, "Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet." And look at this. It says, "And trembling with fear, told him the whole truth." And the last three stories we've heard with Jesus' encounters, they've all had a reaction of fear, haven't they? This fear keeps on going. When Jesus calmed the storm, the disciples were terrified. When Jesus set the demon man free, the crowd were afraid. And this healed woman now is trembling with fear. But it's a false fear. She's fearing fear, but this is a false fear. Maybe she feels guilty. She feels guilty. Maybe she's done something wrong. She's taken power from him or healing without asking. Maybe Jesus is going to say, "Whoever touched me, you owe me some money." And all her money's gone. And so she's afraid. She's afraid about this. But her fear was false, because all Jesus wanted to do was in verse 34. All he wanted to do is, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." He just said one line, and he stopped the whole crowd for that. So why did Jesus do that? Why did Jesus make a scene for that woman who wanted to do it in secret? Why did he make sure everyone could see and hear what happened? Because he wanted everyone to know that this woman, who everyone avoided, who everyone thought was cursed, or who everyone has called unclean for 12 years, he wanted everyone to know she was clean. He wanted everyone to know she was clean, and he even called her daughter. Daughter, you are healed. He stopped it all so everyone would know that this woman is clean. And it's amazing how these small details in the story was Jesus showing how personally divine he is. Like, he knew that this woman didn't just need to be healed, but he knew she needed to be restored in the community. Restoration in the community. And so that's an amazing story, isn't it? Like, that is an unbelievable story. But if you remember how the story started, it was about Jairus asking Jesus to heal his dying daughter. And Jesus takes time out to do this. And it's almost like, whilst maybe Jesus is saying, "Daughter, your faith has healed you, go in peace," then verse 35 happens. You can imagine Jesus with this woman, and literally in that time, verse 35 happened. It says, while Jesus was still speaking, look at that. He only said one line. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and they said, "Your daughter is dead." Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Like, what a scenario, isn't it? Like, look at that. Look at just how it started, amazing thing happened, and then this has happened as well. They're on the way to the sick child. The woman got healed just by teaching. Jesus could have kept walking and maybe made it to the child on time. He could have maybe made it to the child on time, but he stopped and spent time with this lady. And in this waiting time, the girl dies. And Jesus could have said, "I'm really sorry." The guy might have said to him, "Why did you heal her and not come with me?" Or they could have understood it. But instead, he says this in verse 36. He says, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Don't be afraid, just believe. And if you're walking with Jesus and you're afraid, then this phrase, don't be afraid or fear not, is in the Bible over 120 times. Like, if we're walking with him, if our trust is in him, maybe he just wants to tell you, like, don't be afraid, fear not, just believe. And verse 37 says, he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. That's again a weird scenario, isn't it? There's people there already crying, wailing. He goes in and says they're asleep, and then they laughed at him. Like, who are these people? Like, back then, mourners were paid to cry. If someone had died, for some people, they would have paid people to come in, play music, and cry and wail to show the people that there was someone had died, to show the community, the street, that someone had died, to leave them alone, but also to show that it's in a state of mourning. And these people were there, they're getting paid. Jesus comes in and says this girl's sleeping, and it's almost like their job. They've seen loads of dead bodies, these people. This girl is dead. So much so that they laughed at him. Like, who's this crazy guy? Like, they laughed at Jesus. But then he says, after he had put them all out, I love that line, right, get out. After he had put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And you can see in our Bibles, in our English translations, we've got all these English words, but then you've got Talitha cum. And the original New Testament would have been written in Greek, but Jesus and many of his disciples spoke Aramaic. And so the reason why they put in this Aramaic part is almost like to convey, it's a term of endearment. My mother always used to call everyone boys bach. I don't know why, but she used to say, all right, boys bach, boys bach. Boys bach means little boy in Welsh. She would sometimes even call it to girls, I don't know why, but she says boys bach. So it's if you were quoting my mother and you'd have boys bach would be something that as kids we would remember. That was the term. So this one is them remembering, this is a term of endearment. He intentionally said these words, Talitha cum, in Aramaic. And Talitha cum is a transcription of an Aramaic phrase which was common everyday language in Israel at this time. And Talitha is a term of endearment and is related to the word that can also mean lamb. So that this theologian said, the good shepherd is lovingly saying, my little lamb, it's time to get up. My little lamb, it's time to get up. And we don't know this full story, but I kind of have a sense of maybe that was the girl's nickname. Maybe that's what the dad called her, my little lamb, or the mother called her my little lamb. That was what she was known of, and Jesus, through the Holy Spirit, would have known that. And then verse 42, it says, immediately, just like the blood immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and tell them to give her something to eat. He even thought, well, the practical side of it, she's probably quite hungry. Give her something to eat. We're going to watch a little video now to again show you the video. It's hot in here today, isn't it? I can see a few of you are closing your eyes. Maybe we need to open the window. But let's just watch this beautiful video. This is a scene taken from The Chosen on this story. So we've had the spoken word, we've had the explained word, and now we'll have the visual story, which paraphrases the story. But just watch this and let this come alive, and then I'll come and pray.